I stood in white, staring at two empty chairs. Hi, I'm Isabella Reed, 28, and this was my wedding. My parents called it trivial for someone at the bottom. They flew to Hawaii to toast my sister's engagement. I watched them laugh through a glowing phone screen. Tropical drinks, sunset. Not a single word for me. Nicole squeezed my hand while the band kept playing. Michael's vows steadied me, but humiliation burned. Years of being the unseen daughter crashed into me. Every holiday card celebrated Cheryl, never me. Tonight made their choice public, permanent, and cruel. Have you ever been abandoned on your important day? Share your story below. You're not alone. The worst part came days after the dance ended. I grew up in Toledo, where image outranked honesty. Our lawn glittered, even when my heart didn't. Holiday cards bragged, and I disappeared between lines. My parents worshipped outcomes, not effort or kindness. Cheryl fit their brochure of success perfectly. Debate trophies, internships, curated smiles for neighbors. They called her our future, like a family slogan. I loved sketchbooks, ink stains, and late bus rides. Be practical, Dad said, eyes already elsewhere. Mom straightened frames, not feelings, and rarely listened. At 10, I won a school art contest. I carried the certificate home like a miracle. That's nice, Mom said, already lifting Cheryl's medals. The wall celebrated her. The fridge ignored me. I learned to clap for myself in silence. At 14, my first little gallery opened. Corkboard, fluorescent lights, and trembling fingers. Parents crowded other kids. My space stayed quiet. I smiled until my jaw hurt from pretending. Afterward, I walked home with posters under rain. No one asked how it went. Through high school, the script never changed. Speakerphone dinners featured Cheryl's pre-law victories. I waited with updates no one wanted. When I finally spoke, Dad redirected the spotlight. That's great, but did you hear about Cheryl? My ribs memorized the shape of invisibility. College offered a door I built myself. Scholarship, side gigs, and buses after midnight. I designed logos between quizzes and laundromats. Emails home met silence or comparisons. How's Cheryl's firm? Mom asked, skipping my answer. Nicole noticed my wins. They noticed her schedule. Michael admired process. They admired outcomes. Alone, I stitched worth from tiny, overlooked moments. If you've felt unseen around your own table, I see you, and you're not broken. Sometimes love arrives from unexpected directions. I believed distance would save me, until white lace proved me wrong. College became work, not escape, and I liked that. Deadlines beat daydreams into shapeable lines. I learned software shortcuts between cafeteria coffee refills. Design briefs stacked, and I welcomed the wait. Michael noticed my drafts before my smile. He asked about hierarchy, not just color palettes. Show me your thinking, he'd say, leaning closer. I unspooled process, and he actually listened. Nicole barged in with camera straps and chaos. Stop hiding your best slides, she scolded, grinning. She dragged me to showcases I feared. I left with 3 freelance leads anyway. The internship paid in ramen and experience. I traced kerning at 2 a.m. I learned clients by clarity, not merely beauty. I learned managers by calm under pressure. I mailed updates home like prayer flags. Proud of a new campaign, I wrote. Dad replied, Cheryl's moot court crushed it. Mom asked, are you networking like Cheryl? Their applause belonged to a different stage, so I applauded myself in kitchens after midnight. I whispered, good job, over buzzing refrigerators. Nicole clapped loud enough for all 3. Michael poured tea and asked smarter questions. My first agency offer arrived on Friday. Toledo, mid-size, portfolio hungry, expectations high. I signed after 2 interviews and trembling relief. HR handed me a badge. I exhaled. Mondays smelled like fresh print and burnt toast. I built style guides and threaded campaigns. Client names grew bigger. Timelines stayed brutal. Pressure carved confidence, line by careful line. I stopped waiting for a ringing phone. Silence at home became data, not destiny. I measured progress in deliverables, not dinners. I learned to say no without apology. Then came the national retailer rebrand. 6 figures on the deck, stakes higher. I storyboarded storefronts, bags, and billboards. My thumbnails filled a wall like windows. Michael circled details with patient delight. Nicole filmed behind the scenes for my archive. We launched on a rain-bright morning. Hashtags multiplied. Sales numbers ticked upward. A local trade blog printed my name. I stared at the byline until dawn. I sent the link home, just once. Great, Dad texted. Cheryl met a partner. I closed the thread and opened Illustrator. Pain became fuel. Craft became shelter. With each brief, my voice grew steadier. With each checkpoint, my back straightened more. I built an inner room they couldn't enter. I furnished it with proof, not permission. Michael slid a small box across cheesecake. A river breeze lifted the patio lights. I said yes before I saw the ring. His eyes said, I see you, clearly. We picked a date, a small riverside. We saved for linens and simple flowers. I designed invitations with inked lake ripples. I mailed 3 to my parents anyway. If you've built alone, I'm cheering with you. You're not behind, you're building foundations. But the day I wore white, their betrayal cut deepest. The river lights blinked like careful promises. String bulbs hummed above the patio, warm and steady. Nicole checked her camera and mouthed, breathe. Michael's parents waved, already saving us a dance. 2 chairs near the aisle sat untouched. White ribbons fluttered, waiting for names that never arrived. I pretended the wind had stolen their place cards. It hadn't. Silence did. The quartet lifted a familiar hymn. I stepped forward, dress whispering against the stones. Michael's eyes found me and didn't flinch. His jaw set, but his gaze stayed soft. My hands shook, his didn't. The officiant welcomed our small, stubborn gathering. Vows waited on stiff cream cardstock, ink still drying. I glanced left. Emptiness stared back without apology. Nicole shifted closer, framing my face, not the gap. We spoke the old words, made new. I promised presence, not performance, home, not theater. Michael promised patience, partnership, and 100 ordinary Tuesdays. Applause rose like shelter after a storm. The reception loosened shoulders and timelines. Diane handed me water and whispered, family shows up. George started a toast about kindness over pride. People laughed, then listened, then lifted their glasses. I let myself lean into the evening. We danced to a song from freshman year. Friends circled us, clapping the beat off time. The cake tasted like lemon and relief. Then my phone lit beside the bouquet. A notification stacked above missed calls. Mom's profile photo glittered with a gold filter. I shouldn't have looked. I looked anyway. Video. Sunset. Palm trees combing the sky. Cheryl in white that wasn't a wedding dress. Jeffrey in linen, grinning like a billboard. My parents in matching leis, drinks haloed by light. Caption. Celebrating our star's engagement in paradise. No mention of me, no hint of Ohio. The band played something bright and shameless. My chest burned while my face learned stillness. Nicole stepped into my frame like a wall. Breathe with me, she said, counting quietly. Michael reached us, eyes catching the screen, then me. He didn't curse. He didn't chase their shadow. He cupped my shoulder and said, here, now. I pocketed the phone like a cooling brand. We finished the night we had built. We stacked plates, folded linens, thanked every guest. I pressed my palm to the 2 empty chairs. No prayer came, only a clean decision forming. At home, I watched the video once. Sound off, eyes dry. Facts, not daggers. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen. They broadcasted the choice and dared me to swallow. I didn't. I went to sleep beside loyalty. Morning brought coffee, emails, and the same clear sky. I designed thank you cards, then designed a boundary. Michael slid a pen across the table. His smile said, write it like you mean it. Have you stood where love should be and found vacancy? Tell me below. If you're there, you're not alone. And 3 days later, the phone rang, demanding I fund my sister's joy. 3 days later, the ringtone split the dishes. I dried my hands and answered anyway. Isabella, Dad said, voice clipped and practiced. About that old college loan we covered. We need your help for Cheryl's wedding. My grip tightened. The glass didn't break. What loan? I asked, staying even. The $20,000 from your undergrad years. It's only fair you contribute now. Fair? The word sounded forged. I'll call you back, I said and hung up. Michael slid my laptop across the table. I opened folders I hadn't touched lately. Statements, payment histories, confirmation emails. Every month paid, on time by me. No consignor, no transfers, no parental deposits. I called the bank because facts matter. A rep pulled records, walked the years. All clear, she said, loan satisfied. No third-party payers on file. I dialed Dad with documents open. My loans are paid, I said steady. Paid by me, no balance, no you. He coughed, then tried another door. Families help families, Isabella. Be reasonable. Cheryl's event is important for all of us. All of us, I echoed. Except the day I got married. He launched a speech about sacrifice. Behind him, Mom fed him lines. Don't be dramatic, she said, faint and sharp. This is what family does when needed. My voice stayed wintry. Family shows up, I said. You didn't. You called my wedding trivial, remember? Silence stretched, then shrank into bargaining. We'll repay after the honeymoon, he offered. Consider it a gesture for Cheryl. I already gave at the office, I answered. I'm not funding my replacement's spotlight. Heat rose, the mask slipped. Don't be ungrateful, he snapped. We invested in you for years. Send receipts, I said. I'll wait. He didn't because none exist. I opened a document titled Boundary. I wrote like setting margins tight. Plain language, no metaphors, no exits. To Joseph, Ruth, and Cheryl, I began. Your actions clarified my place. You dismissed my wedding, celebrated hers publicly. You attempted to revise my finances. I do not consent to revision or debt. Do not contact me about money again. Do not contact me about trivial matters either. Future attempts will be ignored. I choose my peace and my home. I read it once aloud. Michael counted inhale, exhale like vows. I pressed send, then blocked their numbers. No apology came. The math simplified. I poured tea and opened Illustrator. Lemon light pooled across the tiles. My hands stopped shaking before the whistle. If you've lived this kind of manipulation, tell me below, you're not alone. Your clarity might be someone's courage tonight. I thought that email ended it, until consequences started knocking back. The email went out, and quiet followed. Not peace yet, just room for it. News traveled without my help. Mary stopped inviting them to gatherings. Aunts went silent on group threads. Neighbors asked about 2 empty chairs. Dad tried explaining misunderstandings at a cookout. No one bought the script anymore. Cheryl met friction she didn't expect. Jeffrey's parents asked about Hawaii versus my wedding. Fairness matters, his mother said, unblinking. Their engagement dimmed by its own spotlight. I didn't gloat. I planted quiet instead. Consequences were theirs, boundaries were mine. So I built, brick by careful brick. Morning tea, evening walks, unhurried dinners. Silence stopped feeling like punishment, felt chosen. I finally slept through comparison nights. Michael stayed my steady, ordinary miracle. Nicole kept arriving with loud tenderness. George and Diane welcomed me without tests. Mary asked nothing except truth and time. I learned a softer discipline. Receive without auditioning. Praise entered without suspicion. Love stayed. I framed our wedding photos above the desk. Not to forget, but to remember choosing. Work bloomed under a simpler sky. Clients arrived for integrity, not desperation. I said no without apologizing for air. Boundaries brightened the craft and the home. Then Emma arrived, small and blazing. Her cry uncoated the last shame. Holding her, something fundamental settled. Family became a verb, not inheritance. Sometimes grief visited with old photographs. I let it sit, then leave. Forgiveness didn't mean access. History stayed recorded. Closure looked like a locked door in a garden. If you've been through this, you're not alone. Tell me how you built after breaking. Your words might be someone's first steady breath. I'm Isabella Reed, wife, mother, artist, whole. I chose my life, and it chose me back. And if they ever knock again, the garden stays locked. Before saying goodbye, if this story touched your heart, please give it a like. And share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Don't forget to subscribe for more true family betrayal stories. That reminds us we are stronger than we think.
The clink of wine glasses and warm laughter floated around the long dining table, the private room of Brayburn Hall glowing softly under crystal chandeliers. Noelle leaned forward, cheeks flushed mid-toast. To 31, she said, lifting her glass and still convincing people I'm 26. A ripple of laughter followed. I smiled politely, raising my water glass. She always had the charm for a room. Maris sat across from me in a crimson blouse too sharp for the occasion, watching Noelle with curated adoration. Her hand rested lightly on her wine glass, but her eyes flicked toward me like the click of a knife. I knew that look. Something was coming. I'd seen it before the slaps were metaphorical when cruelty arrived with dessert. When the waiter brought out the second course, seared duck with blackberry glaze, Maris's voice cut through the air. You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you. For a moment, silence cracked the room in half. Forks froze mid-air. One cousin half snorted, thinking it was a joke. Noelle blinked as if she'd misheard. Then the room exhaled into awkward chuckles, nervous, unsure. I didn't say anything. I dabbed the corner of my mouth with a linen napkin and looked across the table. Maris wasn't smiling. Her voice, sharp and cold, carried clearly now. You show up in that dress with your sad little notebook job pretending like you belong here, like you're one of us. You're not. I glanced down at my navy wrap dress, modest, well-fitted. Not the trendiest thing in the room, but not out of place. Not that it mattered. It never really mattered what I wore, how I acted, or how carefully I measured my words. Maris would always find something to stain. Noelle sat frozen beside her, unsure whether to defend me or protect herself. She chose neither. You've spent your whole life disappointing this family. Maris continued sipping her wine like she hadn't just gut-punched me in front of 24 people. And tonight on your sister's birthday, you make it about you, as always. I met her gaze, steady, calm. The smile tugging at the corner of my mouth was small, too small to be read, as defiant, too controlled to be provocation. But it was real, because I had been waiting for this. For weeks, I'd wondered what it would look like when she finally broke form in front of her audience, when the polite monster she kept hidden under pearls and praise finally spoke in full volume. She didn't realize it yet, but the dinner had just become mine. I turned slightly and caught Marco's eye near the back wall. He nodded once discreet. Music faded, and on the mounted screen behind the head of the table, the video began. It started 3 weeks before Noelle's birthday in Tamsin's back garden while we drank lukewarm tea from mismatched mugs. Her kids were at piano lessons. Her husband was at work. Her voice dropped the moment we sat down. Calla, I think your mom's up to something. With the trust. I didn't answer right away. I just stirred honey into my tea and waited for the rest. She told my mom last month that she was restructuring things. Said Noelle was too soft with money and you were unreliable. But it didn't sound like just gossip, it sounded planned. That word landed hard. Planned. Tamsin had always been the quiet observer in the family. Never confrontational, but never naive either. If she was saying this out loud, something was already burning beneath the surface. She's been meeting with that attorney downtown, Glenmore something, I knew the name. He handled our grandfather's estate, and if Maris was going to rewrite the family script, he was the man she'd hire to make it legal. That night, I opened a locked box in the back of my closet and pulled out a thin folder of old documents. Notes from meetings Maris said I was too emotional to attend. Letters she wrote on behalf of me. Signatures that didn't look quite like mine. I had swallowed so many humiliations in silence, thinking dignity meant staying out of the mud. But dignity without truth was just performance, and I was tired of performing. So I called Tamsin the next morning and asked for Marco's number. He wasn't what I expected. Kind eyes, careful voice. He worked in AV for corporate events and occasionally did side work for people like us, people with too much family and not enough power. You want it visible, high quality, and unarguable, he said. Can the space support playback the restaurant has a full system, I told him. Private room mounted screen, full audio. He nodded. Then all we need is a clear trigger and a controlled file. Over the next 10 days, we prepared the clip-cut, time-stamped watermarked. Not just video, but a transcript and full audio backup. No editing tricks, no ambiguity, just her voice, her choices. I rehearsed what I'd do, what I wouldn't. I didn't tell Noelle. I didn't warn Tamsin when the day came. Only Marco knew. Because it had to happen in the open. It had to be the kind of truth that couldn't be smoothed over by flowers cards or tearful denials. And as the screen flickered to life behind my mother's perfectly set hair, I finally let myself breathe. The video played behind me, but I barely heard it now. My mother's voice had become background noise long before tonight. I'd spent a lifetime trying to tune it out. Growing up, I learned quickly that Maris had a preferred daughter. Noelle, with her bright laugh and effortless charm, was always the one invited forward. She could spill juice on the carpet and get a kiss. I could breathe wrong and get sent to my room. It wasn't always overt. Maris knew how to dress cruelty in pearls. At dinner parties, she'd smile and say, Calla's always been sensitive, drawing out the word like it was a diagnosis. If I got an A-, she'd mention how Noelle never needed tutoring. When I got into the university of my choice, she told relatives I was still figuring things out. At 16, I overheard her on the phone telling Aunt Lisette that I was moody and manipulative. I hadn't even known I was being discussed. That night, I stared at myself in the mirror for hours, wondering if maybe she was right. That was the thing about Maris. She didn't need to hit you to make you bleed. She just needed time, repetition, silence from everyone else in the room. I moved out at 24 after spending 6 years home from school because of finances. She'd promised to co-sign the loan papers. She canceled them behind my back. "You need to learn how to build resilience," she said when I confronted her. "You rely too much on other people." Noelle knew. She was there when I opened the rejection letter. She stood frozen in the doorway while I crumpled on the floor. She said nothing. I told myself she was scared of Maris, too. But fear wears thin when it's worn as a shield long enough. Sometimes I wonder what I'd be if I hadn't grown up doubting my own reflection. If I'd been told just once that I was already enough. The sound of Maris's voice on the screen shifted sharper now, unmistakable. She was saying Noelle's name. I turned back toward the room. The next part was going to hurt. Maris laughed loud and pointed. "That dress, Calla. You always did have a knack for dressing like a preschool teacher at a funeral." A few snickers came from the end of the table, our cousins, who'd never grown out of performing approval. Noelle shifted in her chair, caught between loyalty and shame. I reached for my water glass steady and gave Marco the smallest nod. He moved without drawing attention, passing behind the wine cart toward the back panel near the bar. The soft jazz that had underscored the evening faded mid-note. Confused glances darted around the table. Then the television mounted above the fireplace flickered to life. It started without sound, just the image of a sleek office-neutral tones, a plaque on the desk, too blurry to read. Maris tilted her head, the air around her tightening. The audio clicked on. "I want the trust adjusted," came her voice, unmistakable in its clipped cadence. Both daughters removed from primary consideration. Noelle's head snapped toward the screen. The entire table stilled. "I'm the only one with the financial discipline to manage what's left of Everett's estate," Maris continued. "Calla has no ambition. Noelle is too sentimental." A rustle moved through the guests like a breeze cutting through linen. My uncle dropped his fork. Someone whispered, "Is that recent?" The timestamp in the bottom corner showed the date. Just over 3 months ago. 1 week after our last so-called family brunch where Maris had toasted to strong daughters and a shared future. I didn't move. I didn't look at her, but I felt her stillness across the table. Noelle leaned forward, her voice barely audible. "Did you know about this?" I kept my eyes on the screen. Maris, in high definition, signed a document with slow precision. Of course she was saying if anything ever comes to light, I'll just say it was temporary. Health reasons. Anything plausible. People believe what you tell them if you say it with enough poise. I heard Noelle's breath catch beside me. Maris hadn't spoken. Her fingers gripped her napkin as though it could anchor her to the floor. But this room no longer belonged to her. The screen shifted to the next clip. The second clip opened mid-sentence. "She spins like money grows in sunlight," Maris said, voice smooth and measured. If Noelle had access to those funds, she'd be broke in a year, probably drag her husband down with her. A hush swept through the room like a cold front. I didn't turn to look at my sister, but I felt her stiffen beside me. Her fork lay untouched, her birthday cake forgotten. "She's too emotional to manage something that complex," Maris went on, "too attached to sentiment. The estate deserves stewardship, not nostalgia." Then she paused, leaned forward in the frame, and added with that signature exhale of disapproval. "And Calla. Calla has never been stable. I say that with love, of course. There it was, delivered with that same poison dipped in sugar she'd always used. The implication that I was broken. Not by her doing, of course, but by nature." Gasps scattered across the table like popping embers. On screen, the lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "So, to be clear, you want to be named sole trustee with both daughters removed from the inheritance pathway." Maris nodded. "Exactly. If anything happens to me, the secondary beneficiary will be the hospital foundation. At least they'll put the money to good use." The timestamp confirmed it 3 months ago. During the same week, she brought us together for that faux reconciliation brunch, speaking of starting over and trust being earned, not assumed. I could feel every muscle in my shoulders lock. Maris's voice in the room now was barely audible. "Turn it off." Marco didn't move. Neither did I. Noelle stood slowly. "Is this real?" she asked, her voice almost childlike. I turned to her and nodded once. "It's all real." At the far end of the table, Uncle Dean stood up, too glaring at Maris. "You said you were proud of them. You made us believe you'd come around." Maris's mouth opened, then closed. Her hands clutched the edge of the table as though trying to hold the moment together. "I was protecting the legacy," she said faintly. "I didn't mean you meant every word Noelle said, and she didn't sit back down." The third video file loaded with a quiet chime. The audio was louder this time, clearer. "I've learned that family is a performance," Maris said on screen, "and I'm tired of pretending." Maris pushed her chair back so suddenly it screeched across the hardwood. She stepped toward the screen with one arm outstretched, fingers trembling. "Turn it off," she snapped. "That's enough. This is out of context." She moved faster now, fury rising, but Marco was quicker. He stepped between her and the controls with the ease of someone who'd done this before. Calm, firm, immovable. "You have no right," she hissed at him. I rose from my seat and pulled a folder from my bag, placing it gently on the table. Then, let's give them context. I opened it and began to read aloud. Clause 4B, Amendment Proposal. All rights of distribution to Noelle Wren and Calla Wren are to be suspended indefinitely effective upon filing. Trustee authority granted solely to Maris Wren until further notice. Noelle's eyes darted between the screen and the pages in front of me. She looked pale, stricken. Her lips parted like she'd forgotten how to breathe. You were going to cut me out too." Maris turned to her voice, shrill. "I never signed the final version. It was a draft. I wasn't going to. It's signed," I said, turning the page. "Dated, notarized. You were going to." For a moment I saw something unfamiliar in Maris's face. Not just rage, but panic. Not because she'd been caught, but because she no longer controlled the room. She swayed slightly, blinked hard, then reached out to steady herself. Then she collapsed. Gasps tore through the room as she crumpled into her chair and then folded sideways limp. Noelle caught her just before she hit the floor. "Someone call for help," a voice said, and the staff rushed over, ushering guests back, whispering into radios. I stepped back as the room exploded into motion servers clearing space. Guests murmuring in shock, someone ushering a child out into the hallway. The screen still glowed silent now, but the weight of what it had revealed didn't dissipate. Tamsin moved to stand beside me. "You okay?" I nodded once my eyes fixed on Noelle, who was kneeling beside our mother with a towel pressed to her forehead. "She said she wanted the truth out of the way," I murmured. "Now it is." The house was quiet when Noelle showed up. She didn't text first, just knocked and waited still in the same dress from the night before, makeup smudged beneath her eyes. I led her to the kitchen, wordlessly handed her a glass of water, and we sat across from each other at the small table where I usually wrote grocery lists and unpaid thoughts. "I didn't know it would be like that," she said after a long silence. "I thought she was just being dramatic, protecting herself." I didn't respond. There was no version of this where I comforted her through the shock. Noelle looked down at her hands. "I always knew something was off. I just didn't want to get in the middle. And it was easier to believe that you were exaggerating than admit Mom was capable of." Her voice trailed off. "She used to tell me you were unstable," she said quietly. "That you were manipulative. That if I didn't keep my distance, you'd drag me down too." I pressed my palms flat against the table, not to steady them, just to feel something solid. "She made me believe it," Noelle said. "Not all the time, but enough." I looked at her, then really looked, and saw the cracks beneath the gloss she always wore. The girl who had been too scared to speak up. The woman who had learned silence was safer. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she added quickly. "I don't even think I would if I were you." She stared at the ceiling for a moment, then back at me. "But I need you to know. I believe you now. I believe all of it." There was no apology, no grand reconciliation, just the smallest flicker of truth between us, delicate and unfamiliar. She didn't defend Maris, not once, and that was new. It didn't make us whole, but it pulled us out of the wreckage just enough to stand. Noelle finished her water in 2 long sips, set the glass down with quiet finality, and asked if she could see the full transcript. By Monday morning, the calls had started. Tamsin texted first, "Your mom's already spinning." Then came a voicemail from Aunt Renee, clipped and rehearsed Calla. "I'm trying to understand why you do something like this in public. Your mother is devastated." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I knew the script. Maris was calling anyone who would pick up painting herself as the victim of a cruel stunt, a manipulated video, a bitter daughter with long-standing emotional instability. Her words recycled from years of quieter attempts now delivered at scale. Online, she posted a photo from the hospital, her hand in a blood pressure cuff, her caption vague. "Sometimes family hurts you worse than strangers. Some stories will never be told in full." The comments poured in. "Sending love. Stay strong. Praying for your peace." Noelle forwarded me screenshots. "She's framing you as unstable," she said, "and me as brainwashed." I stared at the messages and felt nothing. I had expected all of it. Maris didn't crumble, she retaliated. Not with evidence, but with narrative. Always narrative. Tamsin's phone rang for 2 days straight. Cousins, second cousins, even one of our mother's old college friends. All of them parading versions of the same question. Was it true, or just a misinterpreted family matter I didn't bother to respond to anyone directly? Because before I ever played that video, I had already sent a complete digital copy to the estate attorney. I had included transcripts, notarized documents, and a letter requesting formal review. The trust inquiry had been reopened, quietly, legally, permanently. I wasn't interested in arguing on Facebook. Truth didn't need likes or shares. It just needed to outlive the spin. When David Rowe's office called to schedule a follow-up, I said yes, without hesitation. The woman on the line sounded professional but alert, like she already understood this was no longer a routine audit. Noelle sat beside me on the couch as I opened the updated file from the trustee's office. I think this is the part I told her where it finally stops being hers. David Rowe's office smelled like old books and polished wood. He greeted me with a sigh rather than a handshake, as if the weight of what we were about to discuss had already worn him down. "I owe you an apology," he said, settling behind his desk. I should have seen this coming. I didn't respond. Letting silence fill the gaps was something I'd grown good at. He opened a folder already marked and flagged. "Your mother has a pattern. Minor amendments shifting access, slow erosion of intent. It was subtle for years. But what she tried to do last quarter that went beyond discretion, that was a breach." I watched his hands as he spoke. They shook slightly when he reached for the next page. I ignored it because I thought she was meticulous, concerned. But that video, her own words, removed any benefit of the doubt. He cleared his throat. "As of this week, the Oversight Committee has frozen any further adjustments to the trust. Full access will be provided to both you and Noelle, with legal supervision." I nodded. "You're not surprised?" "No." He studied me for a moment. "She underestimated you. She always did." He slid a copy of the report toward me. "It's not justice, but it's something. I didn't call it a win. I didn't ask what would happen next. I already knew Maris wouldn't let this be the end. But it was the beginning." When I stepped out of his office, Noelle was waiting by the car. I handed her the file. "Looks like we're finally in the room," I said. She opened the folder, eyes scanning, lips pressed tight. We stood there like that for a while, 2 daughters reclaiming what their mother tried to make disappear. 6 weeks later, Noelle showed up with a small paper bag and a handwritten card. We didn't say much, just tied our hair back and started measuring flour, eggs, sugar. No layers, no fondant. Just a plain yellow cake with vanilla frosting, the kind we never had growing up, because Maris considered box mixes beneath her. While it baked, Noelle handed me the card. I opened it slowly. "This time you saved me." She didn't explain. She didn't need to. We ate in quiet, forks scraping plates, the soft hum of an old jazz record spinning in the background. Noelle smiled, once a real one. The kind that didn't require permission. On the counter, I lit a single candle and let the wax pool without blowing it out. Not for my mother. not for what had been lost. For me. For surviving her. For finally being the one who stayed standing when the storm moved on. Noelle reached for another slice, and I poured us both coffee. The smell filled the room familiar and warm. Outside, the streetlights flicked on one by one. Inside, it finally felt like the beginning of something I didn't have to explain. I stopped by Aunt Hester's house with a box of macaroons and the lightness of someone who thought everything was finally about to change. Nolan's wedding was tomorrow, and for once I felt invited not out of obligation, but genuinely included. The envelope had arrived 3 weeks ago, thick with gold-trimmed elegance, my name written in flourished ink that made my chest tighten with hope. "I can't wait for tomorrow," I said as I placed the pastries on her kitchen counter. Hester, who'd been pouring tea, froze mid-motion. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the teapot down. "Selena." Her voice was gentle, but something in her eyes made the room feel colder. The wedding was 2 weeks ago. At first, I thought she'd misunderstood. I reached into my bag and pulled out the invitation, smoothing it open on the countertop. "No, look, June 15th. That's tomorrow." She stepped closer, peering through her glasses, and touched the date with the tip of her finger like it hurt to see it. "They sent you the wrong one," she whispered. "I didn't know until after. I thought you knew." The air felt too thin. I stared at the invitation, willing the numbers to rearrange themselves for the world to make sense again. I had taken time off work. I'd hunted for the right dress, spent days picking out a gift. I'd even practiced small talk for people who rarely remembered I existed. Who decided this?" I asked, but I already knew. She looked down. "Your mother thought it was best. Less drama, less questions." My legs felt detached as I walked toward the front room. On the coffee table lay the wedding album. I hadn't even noticed it before. And there, right in the center of a glossy page, Nolan and Kendra beaming beneath an arch of white roses. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. The photograph blurred. I blinked, but it wasn't the light. It was me. I picked up a crystal frame, the one I'd wrapped as a gift, and held it for a moment before my fingers gave out. The crash of glass startled us both. Aunt Hester reached out to help, but I shook my head. "Let me." I knelt and began collecting the pieces. My hands trembled, but I didn't drop another shard. They had erased me, and I had let them, until now. The ride home felt longer than usual, though I barely remembered the turns. I kept glancing at the invitation on the passenger seat as if it might somehow confess its lie. The paper still smelled faintly of lavender. The calligraphy still looked beautiful. I'd even saved the envelope tucked carefully between pages of my planner like it meant something. I had believed it meant something. 2 weeks ago, while they were clinking champagne flutes and posing beneath garlands, I was standing in front of a boutique mirror asking a stranger whether navy or plum looked more graceful but not attention-seeking. I'd gone with navy. It felt safe. It felt like me. Aunt Hester's words echoed in my head. Your presence would have made things complicated. Complicated. Not disruptive. Not unwanted. Just complicated. I knew exactly what that meant. I would have asked questions. Stood awkwardly in corners. Smiled too tightly. Looked too successful. Said the wrong thing with the right intention. And most of all, I would have reminded them of the truth that I existed and that I remembered. This wasn't the first time. Just the first time they'd left a receipt. The Thanksgiving I wasn't invited to because there wasn't enough room at the table. The text about a family beach trip sent 3 days after it happened. The forgotten birthdays, we thought you were working the emergency calls only when someone needed a check signed. It had all built slowly, politely, with just enough deniability to make me feel dramatic if I ever dared question it. I thought of the dress still hanging in the hallway closet, tags on. The gift wrapped in white and silver paper waiting by the front door. I'd even bought ribbon. I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. It had gone silent since the wedding. Photos were probably in private threads now, away from prying eyes. I didn't type anything. I just stared at the screen, then closed it. I didn't want explanations. I wanted distance. The next morning, I woke early, made coffee, and started my car. I had somewhere to be. Their driveway was as spotless as ever, the hedges trimmed to geometric perfection, not a leaf out of place. I parked and sat for a minute, hands resting on the wheel, watching the shadows shift through the living room window. My mother's laugh floated outside, light, rehearsed, unmistakable. Inside, they were gathered like nothing had happened. My father reclined in his favorite leather chair, feet crossed, a tumbler in hand. Nolan stood beside the fireplace holding a wedding album like it was a trophy. My mother was curled on the couch in her cream cardigan, sipping something from a crystal glass. No one looked up when I opened the door. 3 more steps, and they finally noticed. My mother blinked as if I'd interrupted a thought. "Selena," she said, not surprised, not apologetic, just annoyed. "The wedding was 2 weeks ago," I said. "You sent me the wrong date." "We needed one peaceful day," she replied, like that made it justifiable. Nolan didn't even flinch. "You always ruin things," he said flatly. "Drama follows you." I looked around the room. The chairs were full. The table cleared of the centerpiece I'd shipped to them last month. The album opened to a page where everyone smiled without me. "You didn't even think I'd show up," I said. "You made sure I couldn't." My father rubbed his forehead but said nothing. That was his contribution, silence as always. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just looked. At the photos. At the chilled drinks. At the ease of their joy without me. "You can keep pretending I'm the problem," I said, stepping back toward the door, "but you'll never be able to say you didn't know what you were doing." No one followed me. I closed the door gently behind me, not because they deserved grace, but because I did. Back in the car, I sat for a long time before turning the key. I memorized everything, the way the sun hit the bay window, the smell of cut grass, the sound of their laughter floating past the glass. They had written me out. I finally saw that. And this time, I wouldn't ask to be written back in. I opened the cabinet in my home office, reached behind the stack of quarterly reports, and pulled out the slim blue folder. The deed was inside, along with notarized documents, tax filings, and copies of repair receipts dating back 5 years. I'd kept it all, every transfer, every invoice, every legal signature. Not for revenge. Just because I was the kind of daughter who documented what others forgot. The lake villa had always been their pride piece. In the family for generations, my mother loved to say. She failed to mention that she'd signed over her half to my holding company during one of Nolan's business emergencies, when the restaurant imploded and he needed capital fast. They all assumed I'd forget, or worse, that I wouldn't matter. I sent a message to Jenna to prep the withdrawal paperwork and set up a meeting. Then I drove back to their house this time, not to plead, but to clarify. My mother answered the door, still wearing that practiced expression she'd used on teachers and realtors for years. Back so soon, I walked past her, laid the folder on the kitchen counter, and flipped it open. "You don't own the villa," I said. "You signed it over in April 2019. It's been mine ever since." She glanced down and gave a little laugh. "You're being dramatic." That was a formality. Everyone knew the intention was temporary. "No," I said. "You assumed I'd never bring it up. You counted on me staying quiet like always." My father stood behind her, arms crossed. Nolan wasn't there. "Convenient. I've also closed all co-signed loans, separated the accounts, and canceled the standing payments I added." My mother scoffed. "Your family. It's your obligation. Not anymore." I picked up the folder, slid it back into my bag, and turned toward the door. "You've changed," she said behind me. "No," I said without turning around. "You just never thought I'd stop apologizing for existing." When I got back into the car, Jenna's text was waiting. "All set. Let's meet Tuesday." I replied with a single word, confirmed. Jenna and Thomas sat across from me at the conference table, their laptops open, files stacked with practiced precision. I'd worked with both of them long enough to know they wouldn't waste time asking how I was. They knew better than anyone that this wasn't about emotion. Not anymore. Thomas started with the accounts. "We've identified 4 co-signed loans, 3 joint investments, and 2 open revolving credit lines still under your name." "All closed," I said. He nodded, clicking through tabs. "We'll also reassign all automatic payments to the trust account. They won't have access going forward." Jenna slid a folder toward me. "This is the draft for the restraining order. Emotional harassment, financial coercion, hostile conduct. The wedding incident will help contextualize the pattern. I signed without flinching. When they left, I stayed behind. The office was quiet, no phone calls, no emails, just me and the hum of my laptop screen. I opened a blank spreadsheet and titled it Family Transactions, Unreturned. Line by line, I filled it in. $8,700. Nolan's restaurant loan, $3,000. Property tax advance for Lake House, $450. Emergency dental work for dad never repaid, $2,400. Surprise anniversary party I funded entirely. Each entry came with a date, a memory, a moment I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. I totaled the column. It was more than I expected. Somehow seeing it there in black and white made everything feel clearer. It wasn't about the money. It was about how easily they'd taken and how quietly I'd given. No more silence. I created a second sheet. Emotional incidents, pattern of exclusion. I listed events. Not invited to Thanksgiving 2019. Removed from group photo 2020. Forgotten birthday 2021. Fake wedding date 2023. I didn't cry. I just typed. And with every keystroke, something inside me hardened into steel. The spreadsheet wasn't for them. It was for me. A map of every step I'd taken away from who I was taught to be. When I clicked Save, I didn't title it with a date. I titled it Proof of Exit, and then I printed it for court, for clarity, for whatever came next. They arrived just after noon unannounced. My assistant buzzed through. Your parents are here. They brought someone with them, a pastor. I didn't flinch. I'd been expecting some kind of last act. I told her to send them up. Pastor Dalton entered first, his voice full of practiced warmth. Selena, thank you for seeing us. Your parents thought, well, perhaps a neutral voice could help guide the conversation. There's nothing neutral about someone who's eaten at our table every Christmas for 20 years, I said not unkindly. Verena's eyes narrowed, but she clasped her hands like she was in prayer. We've been praying about your behavior lately, Selena. I raised an eyebrow. My behavior? Dale cleared his throat. The cottage has been in our family. Stop, I said. I pulled 2 envelopes from the desk and slid them forward. This is the invitation I received. This is the one Aunt Hester showed me after. Dalton leaned in, squinting at the mismatched dates. Verena said nothing. You deliberately excluded me, I said. Not by accident, not by oversight, with intent. There were concerns, Verena said, her voice clipped. You have a tendency to bring up uncomfortable things. Like truth. She looked away. I reached into the drawer and took out a manila folder. These are the family photos I kept, the ones where I'm standing off to the side, cropped out, forgotten. I used to think they just weren't flattering. Dale took the folder slowly, his hands unsure. I'm not your emotional investment plan anymore, I said calmly. I'm not your emergency fund, your secret keeper, or your daughter on call. Dalton tried again. Selena, forgiveness. I've spent 30 years forgiving, I said. And all it's done is buy you more time to ignore me. Verena stood abruptly. This isn't over. No, I said, rising to my feet. It is. I buzzed my assistant. Please see my visitors out. As they walked toward the elevator, I noticed Dale still holding the folder. For once, his hands were trembling. When the doors closed, I sat back down and opened my laptop. My inbox held something new. A message from building security. The message from building security was brief. Your brother is in the lobby. He's demanding to speak with you. I didn't get up. I pressed the intercom button. Is he being disruptive? Yes, ma'am. He's loud, insisting this is about financial fraud. Wants answers. Follow standard protocol, I said. I'm not coming down. I ended the call and turned back to my desk. 15 minutes later, my phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the name Kendra Nolan's wife. I answered, waiting for her to accuse or beg. I saw everything she said quietly, the way he acted in your lobby, the yelling. I didn't know he could be like that. I didn't say anything. He told me you refused to help with the wedding, that you didn't care about us. But You never even knew when it was happening, did you? No, she exhaled, shaky. I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions. I looked out the window. She was probably somewhere nearby, watching the building from her car. Still married, still figuring out what kind of man she'd tied herself to. She paused. I recognized the look he had today. My dad used to get that way, right before the worst parts. I closed my eyes for a moment, unsure whether I was speaking to a potential ally or just another person afraid of the truth. Thank you for calling, I said. I don't know what I'm going to do, she whispered. You'll figure it out, I told her. We all do. When the call ended, I stayed still for a long time, wondering whether to build another wall or leave space for one small bridge. Aunt Hester showed up at my office carrying an old leather case that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. She didn't say much, just placed it on the table between us and said, I think it's time. Inside were dozens of printed emails, text message screenshots, and handwritten notes, some of them in Verina's unmistakable cursive. Requests for money, masked as updates. Plans for parties and trips that carefully avoided telling me. Instructions like, don't mention the repairs to Selena, she'll offer to pay again. And worse, tell her it's just a little help for Nolan. She doesn't need to know about the boat. I didn't cry. I read. Slowly, carefully, one document at a time. When Jenna arrived that afternoon, I handed her the folder without a word. She skimmed a few pages, her jaw tightening. This is excellent, she said, her voice cold and focused. It strengthens our position on every front. The next morning, the court confirmed it, restraining order granted. Clear pattern of financial and emotional harassment. They couldn't come within 500 feet of my office or home. I stared at the email from the judge's clerk, the formal language ringing louder than any apology I'd never receive. For the first time, the weight of proof did what years of effort never could. It built a wall no one could cross with guilt or denial. That night, I locked the folder in my fireproof cabinet. Not because I needed to revisit it, but because I finally didn't. The truth was no longer something I had to carry. It carried itself now. The notice went out on a Monday. 30 days to vacate the villa. Official notarized, impossible to ignore. Jenna made sure of that. By Thursday, the family chat was quiet. Then came the whispers. Aunt Lorna canceled lunch with my mother. Cousin Drew pulled out of their annual lake weekend. Grandma's best friend left Verina's invitation unanswered for the first time in 20 years. It was slow at first, then steady, then unmistakable. People had seen the cracks. They just needed permission to acknowledge them. Meanwhile, Nolan's job quietly dissolved. The company restructured and he didn't land in the new org chart. His marriage, barely a month old, was already showing strain. Kendra stopped posting pictures, then stopped tagging him. When the letter arrived, I knew it was my father's by the handwriting. Block capitals, every line measured like he was still drafting blueprints. It wasn't forwarded through Jenna. It was sent directly to me. No return address. Just my name, my address, and a familiar seal. I held it in my hands that night while finishing dinner. I didn't tear it open. I didn't throw it out either. I set it on the shelf beside the deed, the folder, the printed messages. It sat there quietly, not begging to be read. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need to know what was inside. Some things don't need a final word. They need a final boundary. A year passed quietly. The villa, once a symbol of everything I was never allowed to claim, had become mine in every way. I repainted the shutters, learned the rhythm of tide and wind, slept through the night without waiting for the next demand. One afternoon, a thick cream envelope arrived in the mail. I recognized the handwriting, my cousin Rachel. Inside was a wedding invitation handwritten note tucked beneath the RSVP. It wouldn't be the same without you. There was no sting, no hesitation. I smiled and placed the card on my desk before pulling up my calendar. I'd already booked that week for a photography retreat in Maine. Sunrise hikes, salt air, silence. I mailed back a polite handwritten note, wishing her joy. No guilt, no explanation. That evening after dinner, I opened the drawer beside my bed and took out my father's most recent letter. The envelope was thinner this time. I slid out a single page. I failed you, it read. You deserved better. I should have protected you. I see that now. I'm sorry. No promises, no bargaining. Just the truth. I folded it carefully and placed it in the wooden box I kept at the back of the closet. The others were in there too, his older letters, the restraining order, the spreadsheet I'd printed and never looked at again. Not displayed, not destroyed. Just acknowledged. Later, I sat on the porch, barefoot notebook in my lap, wind brushing across my skin. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anything. Not closure. Not apology, not permission. Just the quiet, steady rhythm of a life that finally felt like it belonged to me.